Leonardo da Vinci is talking about camera obscura. I've seen a beautiful camera obscura in Greenwich, London, in the observatory, where it moves. So on a big white table, you can see the scenery of London changing as it goes. But we need to go even further a bit, because how to depict the image on two-dimensional surface, we know exactly what is the year of that invention, and that is 1428. It is Filippo Brunelleschi, and this is probably one of the first images what he made. Vasari has recorded it. He made actually three important images. He made one from the doorway of Santa Maria del Fiore in Firenze, looking at the San Giovanni Baptisterium in front of it, and then made a painting of it, checking with 1 point perspective and right distance from the eye, which we are going to talk a little bit further. The second one he did from Palazzo Vecchio, and who has been in that square knows that that is impossible to make from the viewpoint of one focus, one vanishing point of perspective. So probably he solved it already then. But still, the Santo Spirito, 1428, we can see it is one focal point. The horizontal lines are all parallel, which they are not, in the advanced Perspectiva Artificialis. It all is based on an imagination that in front of us there is a screen, and it suppresses the idea that we are looking at the world with biocular eyes, which are, depending on our body, roughly about 15 to 75 millimeters apart. But that is enough to get the three-dimensional image that is built in our mind gained through these two eyes. But Brunelleschi, of course, was imagining that there is just one eye, and when you use that one eye, you get an imagination on the membrane, as one can see on this left-hand side. This is roughly how the biocular vision works, and if we compare it with the hare who was running in front of the steam engine and horse, it is of course different. Horse and rabbit nearly can see everything around them. That is the problem why the hare is not running away from the car, because he sees the car coming from both sides. So it runs until it's out of energy, which will probably happen with a sad hare of William Turner as well. So the idea of membrane and the imagination of a section of visual cone was the technology that was started in Renaissance. So in a way, if we think of architecture and design professions, we actually see that this modernism, or the current modern ideas that we are still using, which are going out of the fashion, actually tend rather deep into the history. It's not that recent. This is the rough sketch of how Brunelleschi was imagining the San Giovanni Baptisterium. He looked at it like similar triangles forming a geometry, and then he produced a device to check this geometry. So he made an opening, and that is described by Vasari. He made an opening in the painting. He did according to the lineamenti and the perspective rules he was inventing, and then looked through that hole into a mirror, and the mirror was exactly fixed on the right distance. Those of you who have made the perspective drawings probably do know that you have to put your eye exactly in the right position to have the perspective drawing without distortions, as it should be. Of course, nowadays nobody does it anymore, because there is a computer and you can switch and twist it as you like. But for Brunelleschi it was important. So the vanishing point actually is in the mirror of his eye, which is another interesting development, which we leave there for the time being. So this imagination of a membrane and the visual cone looking through the membrane and describing what we see relatively from the distance of the membrane brought forward another type of representational system, first in architecture, but then in all the other arts as well, including painting, was the imagination that we have three planes, and these three planes, orthogonally positioned against each other, can produce a reasonable description of the object. So in my imagination there is a wedge, and the wedge then can be described on three different planes, which are sections of the imaginary infinite space. And then of course I have in a way described that in perspective drawing so that it makes sense to understand it spatially. But then we take the imagination or the real object away. These drawings, three of them, are actually enough in a primitive form to describe what is happening. And that, in a way, was promoted by Alberti. And Alberti is one of the first to emphasize the unity between design ideas, plans, and elevations and architectural models. But of course, it was Brunelleschi who used the plan and the elevation to construct this perspective painting of San Giovanni Baptisterio. And in his book on painting, De Pictura, Alberti suggests that architects should describe depth when drawing the footprint of a building, iconographia, meaning on the parallel plane of the horizon, ex fundamenti descriptioni. The architectural drawing should be executed without altering the lines and maintain the true angles as well as exactly on the basis of controllable measures. So the lines and the angles have to be right. And this is a revolutionary thing for representation, because before that, this was not really used in this kind of systematic way of describing the reality. In the antiquity, it was the one-to-one drawing on the floor of the Greek temple. The plan was drawn out one-to-one scale on the perfect platform, which in case of Parthenon is slightly curved due to the perspective distortions, which it enhances, and the curvature is somewhere 5 kilometers inside the earth, if one is interested to look at it. In Middle Ages, it was mostly the model and the matrix, geometrical matrix, either produced by the square, as it was called, or the angular device, which had specific proportional ratio in it, not necessarily always 60, 30, and 90 degrees as we are used to. And then, of course, the geometrical matrix. So in the facade of Milan Cathedral, where a big commission was called in to discuss how to proceed, it was not discussion about the facade. It was the discussion about the geometrical proportions and the matrix, which kind of geometrical system to be used. And only in late Middle Ages the drawings develop. The drawings become, first they are of course the secret knowledge of the builders, master masons, lodges, but later on, like with Villard de Honaqueur, they become already public. And if you look at the sketchbook of Villard de Honaqueur, you can already see the three-dimensional devices coming up, but it is only in the 15th century when the fully systematized architectural drawings appear. And it is the plan and elevation which have not really been thought of as sections of that imaginary space. The sections come a bit later, and this is what Pérez Gómez, Alberto Pérez Gómez is saying about it. When section drawings were introduced into the process of architectural ideation, they were not simply extrapolated from the other drawings, such as plan and the elevation. Rather, they seem to have originated from the fascination of the role of buildings as gnomons, so the sun dials or sun clocks, or shadow tracers. So the section was really as a part of investigating the building itself, not yet as a building description of building device, although when you read it there, it definitely recommends that this is how it should be produced. But that is already slightly later. So it is the Renaissance where this type of image that we are now using in massive quantities in the form of photographs and films and whatever drawings we use has really developed into its full scale. And very often in the photographs we do not realize, or we are not concentrated in understanding, that they do depict space three-dimensionally. So the space three-dimensional, the representation of three-dimensional space on two-dimensional surface slips our conscious understanding of image, and it is there behind which we are not really recognizing. And when these, even today, the plan sections and elevations are used in architecture, but the architectural development, which one can see here, already has indicated that sections and elevations have become obsolete. How many sections and elevations you need to do to manufacture this by hand or by machine? And you see on the right-hand side, it's not really sections, but it's the algorithm of how the line is formed, and out of that line one actually can manufacture it. So if we started from screens, and if I'm looking at the world through the eyes of an architect, I must say that actually this second modernism we are talking about, coming from the electrical circuit and mass production of machines, for architecture, it's still rather long period, and this modernism definitely reaches out into the so-called New Age, as it is rightfully called, Renaissance. But we now already see that the representational system of architectural design and representational system of image is undergoing changes. So this is this new type of describing space with parametrical or other devices that really destroys the 600 years old of representational system. The second one is that the authorship or the isolation of architect of designing is developing pretty much the same way as the representational system is changing. And the authorship also actually takes presence and is understandable since Renaissance. And there are a couple of these people who have personally, in a way, produced the intellectual property of authorship. It is Donatello, it is Alberti, and it is Brunelleschi. And this is the famous story. I'm sure some of you have heard of it in the history of art. It is when Donatello was asked to make a sculpture of a merchant, and the merchant came and started to argue that it is too expensive. And Vasari writes, whereupon the merchant, thinking it too much, said that Donato had wrought it in a month or little more, and that this meant a gain of more than half of a florin a day. Donato, thinking this too much of an insult, turned round in anger and said to the merchant that in the 100th part of an hour he would have been able to spoil the value of a year's labor. And according to the legend, he throws the sculpture down from the roof of Palazzo Vecchio, and it is of course destroyed, and the merchant is sad. But nevertheless, Donatello was showing that he is not a handicrafts person who is forming the material. He is artist, and he wants to be paid for being artist. The same actually happened to Filippo Brunelleschi, who is buried under the floor of Santa Maria del Fiore. It's in the bookshop of the crypt. There is a bookshop, and in the bookshop there is the grave of great ingenious guy, as it is said there. Ingegni Iuri Filippo Brunelleschi Florentini, great man from Firenze, Florence, and he was doing the cupola. He had a long. Anybody knows the story about Brunelleschi and Ghiberti? Anybody? Okay, some of you know. Anyway, they had an argument already when there was a competition for the doors, gilded doors of San Giovanni Baptisterium, the one that he was then looking at when he was doing the perspective painting. And then due to politics, maybe due to interpretations, Brunelleschi was turned down, and Ghiberti became the sculptor of the doors, got famous. And Brunelleschi, and I think it was Donatello, he went to Rome to look at the buildings, and everybody in Rome was thinking that they were digging for fortune, but they were actually measuring and drawing the ancient ruins, out of which Brunelleschi, of course, in a way reconstructed and developed the understanding how the brickwork should work. And then came the competition for the cupola of the cathedral. It is rather wide. No one knew how to cover it with cupola, and then Brunelleschi came up with ingenious technical device, taking the geometry of Middle Ages, the Gothic arch, actually out of which this cupola geometry is made of, and then the brick building tradition of ancient Rome, and then the double shell of the cupola. So you can see the internal shell, and then the outside shell, and then the cross bracing and ribs in between. And one can really travel up to the cupola and look at the beautiful city of Firenze. So when he started to build it, the political system in Firenze asked that the capo maestro, who is the head of the building, there was a big building committee of the church consisting of several merchants and other high dignitaries. Then they said that it is too much of a big job for one person, and put Ghiberti as a second capo maestro into the system. So his enemy and competitor from 20 years before again came into his way. And then on the right-hand side, you can see how the cross-bracing and strengthening reinforcement of the cupola is done on that right-hand drawing. And when the cross-bracing was in an important stage, he said that he's sick and he's not coming to the building. And if Ghiberti is the other master mason in the business, let him do the reinforcement. And didn't come to the building. And the committee waited, then waited again. Ghiberti had to say, I don't know how to do it. And then the building committee sent the police or the sentry of the city to check if Brunelleschi is really sick, who said that Brunelleschi probably is not sick, so Brunelleschi spent another day or two in the prison for lying to the building commission, but then he was named as the sole author and building master of the cupola. So he pushed forward that his intellectual property, as we say today, his ideas were recognized as him being the author. And when Brunelleschi is still partly in the medieval understanding, although the medieval master masons, although they probably also were had vanity enough to be named and produced the sacred dance when the cathedrals were blessed in. Nevertheless, in the Middle Ages, the author was really transforming the material according to the laws of God. So the perfect geometrical, sacred geometrical background of the cosmos made by God was the blueprint. And then architect or master mason, who wasn't architect in current understanding, was the one who tried to copy it or really to transform the materials according to the godly laws. So, and of course the cathedrals took a long time to be built, so there were several master masons which again then distributed the authorship around many people. But Brunelleschi still comes up with the understanding, the building is mine because I built it. Whereas Alberti already goes into the totally intellectual authorship. He says, this building is mine because I designed it.